It's my pleasure today to introduce Jean Goodwin. When I read that Dr. Goodwin is going to be the speaker today, I jumped on to be the facilitator. She is definitely one of my favorite UTMB doctors. Fortunately, I have not had to go see her because she works with trauma and dissociation, particularly childhood trauma. And for someone who does that, Jean's joie de vivre, her joy in life, is really, really wonderful, and I'm always very inspired by her. She's a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst in private practice here in Galveston. She's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Texas Medical Branch and is a training and supervising analyst on the faculty of the Center for Psychoanalytic Studies in Houston. Jean Goodwin is an author, lecturer, and consultant on childhood trauma and dissociation. And today, her presentation to us is on Jude the Apostle, Lessons and Carols. My pleasure to introduce Jean Goodwin.
So nice to be here. And as usual in Advent, I'm going to bring you some news from the wild, wacky, wonderful world of Catholicism. And so I'm going to be talking about Saint Jude Thaddeus. And Judy, you might put up the pictures at any time now. Our new little grandson was born on the eve of Michaelmas, September 28th, 2021. After watching him for several days to make sure the name would suit, his parents named him Jude Goodwin Fawaz. The naming of this baby had become somewhat of a contentious topic within his future family. The Shiite branch floated the idea of Ali as a worthy and suitable name. The Catholic side saw that bid and raised it, proposing instead Jesus. Saint Jude, as is his wont, came to the rescue, not with a compromise, but with a whole different story. Jude in Arabic means generosity, hard to come up with a better, more friendly, more helpful virtue. The Hebrew translation is giver of joy. That suits the Judester as well. You can see his goofy grin, which turns into an infectious giggle. But like his namesake, Jude, the saint of things despaired of, baby Jude has a darker side. At times his eyebrows will go up, his pupils dilate, his little mouth forms a shocked and disappointed O. I have seen this expression many times before on the face of his grandfather. My husband. So I can offer a rough translation. Little Jude would be saying something to this effect: "Oh God, how did I end up here in this terrible place, where in addition to everything else that is bad, I find myself surrounded by idiots." Thank you, Judy. You can turn off the share slides now. So, finding oneself in that terrible place. This is an experience that tends to recur. So I looked up the little guy's name saint in hopes that Jude Thaddeus might have something to offer. Non-idiotic advice, funny stories, parables, curses, magic of any kind. The first step was to find Saint Jude, to figure out how to pick him out from that crowd of apostles, always looking down on us from stained glass windows and museum walls. Not the one with the keys, that's Peter. And not the one who looks excruciatingly nice, that would be John. It seemed like a clue when I discovered that Jude has a flame coming out of the top of his head. This means he was there at Pentecost, except this turned out to be no help at all because they were all there at Pentecost, so they all have little head flames. Jude is one of the ones who has a beard, and he also looks a little like Jesus, which makes sense because the two of them were kinfolks. Usually, too, Jude is holding a staff, though in some pictures it is an axe. The story is that Jude was beaten with the staff and then beheaded with the axe. More rarely, you will see him holding a pen because of the epistle he wrote. Or sometimes he has a carpenter's rule because, like the rest of the Jesus family, he made his living by farming and by building things. On his chest, like a t-shirt logo, is the face of Jesus. This is the Mendelian, the major Jude miracle, so that is the first story I will tell. Once upon a time, King Abgar of Edessa, now in South Turkey, sent a messenger to Jesus. The king had fallen ill with leprosy. The doctors were hopeless. None had offered anything except a poor prognosis. But the king had heard rumors about this wandering rabbi in Galilee, this Jesus who was curing people, even lepers. Rumor also had it that Jesus was in trouble with the law and might be in the market for political asylum elsewhere. So Abgar dispatched his messenger to Galilee to bring back the beleaguered prophet for a bedside consult. Jesus, however, had other priorities. Jesus said no. But then he picked up a discarded towel and pressed his face into it, imprinting its image. This was the Mendelian, which Jesus handed over to Jude, who eventually brought it all the way back to Abgar's kingdom. The Jesus image cured the king, who then gratefully converted his entire kingdom to Christianity. The Mendelian now rests in the Vatican. This adventure has a pattern that we will come to recognize as typically Jude-like. The king has a needful, reasonable wish. Jesus says no. And when Jesus says no, you are pretty well sunk. I imagine a whole series of subsequent disappointments. The messenger returns empty-handed. The king's leprosy worsens. His fingers start falling off. Then his nose. Word reaches Edessa about the crucifixion. No need now even to bother sending a second messenger. Jude finally arrives, carrying a dirty, wadded-up piece of cloth. Who knew the miserable rag would turn out to be magic? This was not the outcome Abgar had in mind. It was weirder, but somehow okay. Jude was born in Galilee, and like James, John, James the Lesser, Thomas, and Simon the Zealot, he is thought to have been some kind of close kin to Mary and Jesus. It is clarifying for me to think of the apostles as a cousinship. We all grew up with cousins. They were our first co-conspirators against our parents and the rest of the world. It was our cousins who taught us about one for all and all for one, not to mention cigarettes and alcohol. The Jesus cousin group must have gotten even tighter when Herod killed cousin John the Baptist. And by the time the Romans killed Jesus, this group of cousins had become so fierce that they all had little flames coming out of the tops of their heads. And that's when they took on the world. Baby Jude has the good luck to have been born into whatever rhymes with a truckload of cousins, a formidable cousinship, which should be able to start a new religion, or at the very least, something like the French Revolution. The only story we have from Jude's childhood is that he was bitten by a snake, and then his cousin Jesus, also a child, healed him. As an adult, Jude was closest to his cousin Simon the Zealot. The two of them, Simon and Jude, will often share a stained glass window. Zealots, according to the Talmud, were boorish, wild ruffians whose refusal to allow any sort of compromise with the Romans led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in AD 66. Given the tragic history of the Jesus family, a turn toward zealotry seems understandable. Jude and Simon went on the mission trail together to Armenia, Persia, Syria, Beirut. Almost all of these victims of their missionizing have claimed the honor of having killed them. Jude's bones have been traced to Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, St. Peter's Basilica, and the Toulouse Cathedral, where pilgrims on the Camino Santiago stop to venerate Jude's relics. This last is actually where I was on the day that baby Jude was born. At some point, Jude found time to write the Epistle of Jude, the next to the last book of the New Testament. Also the shortest, for which we can all be thankful. Despite its brevity, the book of Jude contains a lot of choice invective, condemning false teachers as shepherds who only feed themselves, autumn trees without fruit, uprooted and twice dead, and wild waves of the sea foaming up their shame. Those who have endured the sharp edge of my tongue might pray, perhaps to Jude, that the little grandson does not inherit this gift for invective, either from his grandma or his name-saint. False teachers, however, especially the wanton and perverse types that Jude was condemning, are in fact really, really bad and to be despaired of. The Buddhists sent them down to the lowest depths of hell. One hopes that by writing it all down, Jude got some of his appropriately righteous indignation off his chest. And I wish I knew what poetic or practical justice Jude had in mind for those perpetrators, because they are still among us. My favorite small story from Jude's epistle strikes a kinder, more merciful note. When Moses died on the threshold of the Promised Land, it was Satan who came to collect the body and soul, claiming that since Moses had once murdered a man, he was Satan's property now. This is when the archangel Michael turned up, driving Satan away and calling him a slanderer. The archangel's position being that Moses, like the rest of us, was much more than the worst thing he had ever done. As happens with many saints, Jude's story gets much more interesting after his death. In the reign of the Roman Emperor Domitian, AD 81 to 96, the occupation forces in Judea got wind that there were some guys in Galilee claiming to be descendants of King David. Zealots in the family, too, back in the day, and 3 or 4 of them had been executed for treason. So the emperor had them rounded up and brought to him. Zochar and James, they were called, and they were the grandsons of Jude. Now, Catholics will be almost as puzzled about how Jude could have grandsons as they are about how Jesus could have brothers. But folklore is not squeamish about such things, and even suggests that Jude might have been the bridegroom at the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turned the water into wine. This could someday be matter for a wedding toast once little Jude grows up. So Zochar and James were dragged in before the emperor. They were a ragged, sunburnt, and hungry-looking duo. But, thought Domitian, all that could be just clever disguise. Then the emperor noticed their hands, ugly, calloused, weathered, and then he knew. These guys were not kings. They were mere peasants. Their paltry so-called farm amounted to less than 20 acres. They posed no threat whatsoever to the mighty Roman Empire. Zochar and James seized the opportunity to preach a little. It is a heavenly and angelic kingdom, they explained. Relieved, Domitian let them go free, and freed as well some other imprisoned Christians, having realized that these people were of absolutely no account. Jude, as I have explained, is fond of suspense and the long-delayed happy ending. But when it comes to the grandkids, he is more than willing to go for the quick fix, simply pulling a little bit more wool over the eyes of the know-it-all emperor. It was not until the Middle Ages, more than 1,000 years after his head got chopped off, that Jude asked to be given the job of taking care of lost causes. He appeared both to St. Bernard and to St. Bridget, complaining that nobody was praying to him. He was bored, and he was lonely, and it was all a stupid mix-up. People couldn't tell the difference between Jude and Judas, and they for sure did not want to be caught praying to Judas. So Jude offered himself as the saint of last resort. The uninformed could go on praying to those other saints, the ones with less confusing names, better public relations, longer and less angry epistles. But once all of those had let you down, once all else had failed, then there would be Jude to turn to. Whether this works is another matter. Jude is the patron saint of Armenians, who had quite a lot of trouble with the Turks, and of the Chicago Police Department, which had quite a lot of trouble with Al Capone. Also of hospitals, many of which have not been the happiest of places this past pandemic. And then there is Saint Jude's Hospital, where all the poor children with incurable cancers go. So whatever it is that Jude has to offer those of us who find ourselves in desperate straits, it is not prevention. Nonetheless, Jude has his fans. Judes are featured both in a great novel and in a timeless song. I don't have time to explain to you about Thomas Hardy's novel, Jude the Obscure, which I cannot recommend to you in any case. Hardy's biographer wrote that reading the novel was like getting slapped in the face again and again. It is as if the main character reaches that desperate place where you expect Saint Jude to kick in with some version of rescue, however weird or offbeat. But then the rescue never happens. What happens is yet another grim disappointment. But I can talk a little bit about Hey Jude, which is the 10th most popular song ever. The original title was Hey Jules. Paul McCartney felt sorry for John Lennon's wife and their little 5-year-old son, Julian. Little Jules was almost a Beatle himself, having inspired with his drawing their hit, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John Lennon had abandoned them to pursue his affair with Yoko Ono. So they had lost not only John Lennon as husband and father, but their entire social life as part of the Beatles phenomenon. So Paul drove out to the country to hang out with them. On the road, he made up a little song to sing to little Jules. Singing it over and over to himself, he decided that Hey Jude sounded better than Hey Jules. Paul was so delighted with the song that whenever he stopped at a pub, often, we might conjecture, he sang it for all the clientele, and they chimed in to sing it along with him. John Lennon and his son Julian never really made peace. Jules was publicly bitter. How can he talk about peace and love and have his family in bits and pieces? No communication, adultery, divorce. When John Lennon was murdered, Jules received a rare summons from Yoko. She wanted him to come break the news to her little son, Sean. Sean was 5, the age that Jules had been when his father abandoned him, and incidentally, the age that John Lennon had been when his parents divorced. That divorce had been even tougher in that neither parent wanted little John. He ended up being raised by an aunt. And then when John Lennon was 17, his mother Julia was killed in a road accident. Jules was 17 now. But Yoko was not wrong to trust the task to him, whether endured, inherited, or inhaled from his father. Jules knew something about pain and how to voice it. He did a good job talking to his little brother. And then the will was read. Jules had been left out. Some of you may be thinking that this is yet another Jude story that feels like getting slapped in the face over and over. But with Saint Jude, we sometimes need to give him a decade or 2 or 3, or sometimes several generations, to work out his odd approximations to a fairy tale ending. Years later, Julian successfully sued Yoko Ono for many, many gazillions. Contrary to any reasonable expectation, it was in the process of litigation that they finally became friends. Jules and his half-brother Sean now go on each other's band tours. They recently got together to celebrate what would have been their dad's 80th birthday. Plus, we have the song, which is its own happy ending.